In the Taoist writings of Zhuang Tzu, we read, "You are old, sir, while your complexion is that of a child. How is it so?" The reply was, "I have become acquainted with the Tao." Let us now acquaint ourselves with the Tao and be at peace. The Tao is the key to our immortality. Tao in Chinese, which as you know is spelled T-A-O, Tao, means road, way, or path. Tao has also been used to mean the way something is done, the way of human behavior, or the course or movement of nature. In a broader sense, Tao has come to denote the way, the truth, or the teaching. The concept of the Tao is central to Taoism. Taoism is the Chinese religion and philosophy based chiefly on the teachings of the 6th century BC Chinese sage Lao Tzu. This is an 11th century depiction of Lao Tzu riding an ox by Chao Bu Zhi. This is another rendition of Lao Tzu. We will meditate upon this one as we are studying his writings. Many of you have commonly heard his name pronounced Lao Tzu, but it is correctly said Lao Tzu, and it is spelled L-A-O-T-Z-U, Lao Tzu. Would you like to say that with me? Lao Tzu. In the transliteration from Chinese to English, the U in Tzu was meant to be a short U, so it's Lao Tzu and not Lao Tzu. In Taoism, the Tao signifies the absolute, the ineffable reality, the all-embracing first principle and source of all being, to which all things ultimately return. Lao Tzu is considered to be the founder of Taoism. But one Chinese legend says the philosophy originated in the 3rd millennium BC with a ruler known as the Yellow Emperor, and that it was transmitted orally from generation to generation until Lao Tzu wrote it down in the Tao Te Ching. Tao Te Ching means classic of the way and of virtue, or the book of the way and its power. Because this sacred scripture is cryptic and mystical, it has had many interpreters. Today, the Tao Te Ching is the most frequently translated work next to the Bible. In ancient times, this work was viewed as a treatise that expounded a way of life and a method of government to be implemented by the ruling class. The perfect ruler was seen as a sage who would return his people to a life of simplicity, innocence, and harmony with the Tao. Later Taoists, however, used the Tao Te Ching as the creed of the recluse and advocated withdrawal from public life and officialdom. This ideal of the Taoist mystic hermit became a prominent theme in later Chinese thought. I would like to introduce you to the concept of the Tao using a recent translation of the Tao Te Ching by Robert G. Henricks. It is based on manuscripts discovered in 1973 in the village of Ma Wang Dui in south-central China. Like other versions of the text, these manuscripts were divided into 2 halves, one called the Tao, or way, and the other called the De, or virtue. However, in the new manuscript, the 2 halves were switched from their usual order, the De section coming first. So the title given to the newly founded text is De Dao Jing instead of Tao Te Ching. Robert Henricks writes in his introduction, "The starting point for understanding the philosophy of Lao Tzu is understanding what he means by the Tao or the Way. The Way is Lao Tzu's name for ultimate reality. Though he continually points out that he does not know its true name, he simply calls it the Way. Lao Tzu says in the Tao Te Ching, 'I do not yet know its name. I style it the Way. Were I forced to give it a name, I would call it the Great.' Great means to depart. To depart means to be far away. And to be far away means to return." Henricks writes, "For Lao Tzu, the Way is that reality, or that level of reality that existed prior to and gave rise to all other things, the physical universe, heaven and earth, and all things in it. What the Chinese call the 10,000 things. The Way, in a sense, is like a great womb. It is empty and devoid in itself of differentiation, one in essence. Yet somehow it contains all things in seed-like or embryo form, and all things in creation emerge from the Tao as babies emerge from their mothers." And so we have the tremendous sense of the Tao as the great womb of cosmos that gives birth to all things. It is a mystical contemplation of something we sense and know with our innermost knowing. And it is well that Lao Tzu called it simply the Great. But Henricks says, "The Way does not simply give birth to all things. Having done so, it continues in some way to be present in each individual thing as an energy or power, a power that is not static, but constantly on the move, inwardly pushing each thing to develop and grow in a certain way, in a way that is in accord with its true nature. The way in things is generally what Taoists mean by de, virtue. But note that Lao Tzu uses virtue in his text in two different ways. On occasion it means this life energy in things, but in other places it seems to mean virtue in the sense of morality, the sense in which it is used by the Confucians. That the Tao is a feminine reality and a maternal reality seems clear. It is not surprising, therefore, that Lao Tzu refers to the Tao as the mother in no less than 5 places. We have the great sense of Lao Tzu, the sense of his knowing what mother is, in the cosmic sense of her presence. And this is why we are touched by realms of highest light when we read his word, his writings. We are one with him through the Tao, and we sense his mystical awareness. And the very fact that he had this awareness in physical embodiment, even as he walked the earth as, quote, an immortal in that body, means that he has quivered this warp and woof of a physical cosmos with this enlightenment, which we can now partake of, not only because he wrote it down, but because he experienced it, and in his experiencing of it, he left that record in all planes and levels of this physical universe. Lao Tzu is unascended, and so we can feel his presence still a part of the universe that we occupy. This is why this book, the Tao Te Ching, has been translated second only to the Bible in quantity. It is because people find in it the thread of contact with their own Tao, their own reality, and that reality as one for all of us. In chapter 25 of the De Dao Jing, we read, "There was something formed out of chaos that was born before heaven and earth, quiet and still, pure and deep. It stands on its own and doesn't change. It can be regarded as the mother of heaven and earth." Arthur Wally's translation of chapter 52 opens with the words, "That which was the beginning of all things under heaven, we may speak of as the mother of all things. He who apprehends the mother thereby knows the sons. And he who has known the sons will hold all the tighter to the mother, and to the end of his days suffer no harm." Harmlessness comes about by holding on to the mother, but one cannot hold on to the mother unless one has perfect love for that mother, perfect peace, perfect harmony. So the very holding on and the ability to hold on shows a way of harmlessness. To achieve harmlessness, we must dig to the depths of the unconscious and the subconscious and study all of those psychology books that I have listed for you, and wrestle and sweat, as it were, great drops of blood as you do that mighty work of the ages of purging yourself of what I call the anti-Tao, the not Tao. When you feel the intimations of reality and the great love of this reality, it is painful to be outside of it. The only surcease from that pain is for the moment much greater pain of wrestling with depths beneath depths beneath depths of records, of the misuse of the Tao that has become like concrete as the anti-Tao. We must wrestle in the etheric body, the mental body, the desire body, and yes, the physical body itself. The physical body contains within itself a consciousness of mortality that it does not desire to surrender, that it fears to surrender because it is so much a part of the law of death, mortality. So we come to understand as we pursue this way what it really means to disassociate ourselves from the law of mortality and all the corollaries to that law that we ourselves have made and with which we have confined ourselves, compartmentalized ourselves, separated ourselves from the great Tao. We cannot become immortals unless we become one with the great Tao. We cannot become one with the great Tao until we conquer death and hell within ourselves. Jesus came to demonstrate that. Lao Tzu saw it, realized it, and wrote it down in another time. And it has been written again and again. It is the universal message of the divine whole that we would enter. He who apprehends the mother thereby knows the sons who are the Christed ones, the Buddha ones. And he who has known the sons will hold all the tighter to the mother, and to the end of his days suffer no harm. Chapter 34 describes the mothering of the great Tao. Wing Sit Chan's translation reads, "The great Tao flows everywhere. It may go left or right. The way is perpetual movement. This is my statement upon contemplation of the Tao. The way is perpetual movement. It is the great causal body of cosmos, the great causal body of the entire cosmos. Yes, the womb of the Divine Mother, out of which all things are made and to which all things return. Chapter 34 of the De Tao Jing reads on. All things depend on the Tao for life, and it does not turn away from them. It accomplishes its task, but does not claim credit for it. It clothes and feeds all things, but does not claim to be master over them. Always without desires, it may be called the small. All things come to it, and it does not master them. It may be called the great. Therefore the sage never strives himself for the great, and thereby the great is achieved. Henrik says, there is an analogy that works well in helping us see exactly what kind of thing the Tao is and how it works. In that analogy, the Tao resembles an untended and uncared for, uncultivated field, and the varieties of wildflowers that grow in such a field represent the 10,000 things. Were you to go to such a field in the winter, you would see only brown soil or white snow. Should you return to that field in May or June, you would discover that a marvelous transformation has occurred, the field now being filled with all kinds of wild flowers. There are, as it were, 10,000 different varieties of flowers, with each of the species being somehow unique in color and shape. What had appeared to be devoid of life in the winter was in fact a very fecund womb, containing within itself, in its oneness, the seeds and roots of all different things. The field continues throughout the summer to care for and nourish each of its children, supplying them with water and nutriments that are vital for life. And in this nurturing work, the field cares for all of the flowers without discrimination, and it takes no credit for all that it does. The field accomplishes all that it does without taking any action. That is to say, we never see the soil actively doing anything. All that happens seems to happen on its own, by nature. My thoughts on this are, this nature is the nature of the great causal body of cosmos, the great Tao, out of which all things were made. The Tao has endowed everything with a component of itself that makes that thing unique in its essence and design, capable of fulfilling its reason for being. It is the principle of the seed within itself. All things created have the seed within itself to realize the fullness of the reason for being. Hence, the earth is endowed by the Tao with an active, living, pulsating reality, capable of perpetuating all who live upon it, and each individual part of the whole. The field is a microcosm of the totality of the great central sun. And the great central sun is the flowing nucleus of the great Tao that encompasses all. Henrik says, one of the things said about the Tao a number of times is that it does nothing, and yet there is nothing left undone. To me, this is the meaning of I am that I am, or in the sense of the Divine Mother, Isis. What is divine reality simply is. The I am that I am is, or Isis is. Isis is the individed whole in equilibrium. So is the I am that I am. It is the plus-minus polarity as one, so that it appears neutralized. Its beingness does nothing, and yet there is nothing left undone. It is the active and the passive become one. It does nothing, yet nothing is left undone. This is our concept of the eternal Father-Mother. Since the Tao is perpetual motion, we can understand that the Tao is Father perpetually becoming Mother, and Mother perpetually becoming Father. And as we get on with our terminology, it is the Yang perpetually becoming the Yin, and the Yin perpetually becoming the Yang, in the great circle of the Tao. We know the teaching that the Mother is the active principle of the Father in the material universe. And so we understand why Lao Tzu gives us the concept of the Tao as the Great Mother, because that is what we see in the matter universe of the Tao. But when he says the Tao does nothing, he is speaking about the fact that Father is in spirit and does not act in matter. So the Tao as Father does nothing. The Tao as Mother does all things. Henrik says, the ideal ruler is someone who rules in this way. As the Tao is to the 10,000 things, so is the ruler to his people. The ideal ruler makes it possible for all of his people to grow to maturity in good health, to feel free to be who or what they are by nature. Yet he claims no credit for what he does. In chapter 17, Lao Tzu writes, the ideal ruler completes his tasks and finishes his affairs, yet the common people say, these things all happened by nature. In chapter 2, Lao Tzu writes, the sage dwells in non-active affairs and practices the wordless teaching. The 10,000 things arise, but he doesn't begin them. He acts on their behalf, but he doesn't make them dependent. He accomplishes his tasks, but he doesn't dwell on them. It is only because he doesn't dwell on them that they, therefore, do not leave him. Non-attachment to the fruit of action. Cardinal teaching of Lord Gautama. Henrik says, one of the things that seems to follow from the analogy of the Tao and the field is that for any individual flower, A, to be what it can be, for a sunflower to realize its sunflowerness, its genetic makeup, and B, to live out its natural lifespan, there is only one requirement that must be met. It must keep its roots firmly planted in the soil. The soil is the Tao. But this is precisely what humans do not do. That is to say, Lao Tzu seems to assume that something happens to people as individuals and to societies as a whole as they grow up, such that as adults they are uprooted and have lost touch with the way. As a result, adults constantly lose sight of who they are by nature and are constantly striving to be someone or something they are not. And they do things that lead them to physical danger and harm. Consequently, if human beings are to be what they are and what they can be and live out their natural years free from harm, they must, as adults, return to the way. But what exactly does it mean to return to the way? And how does one make that return? In chapter 14, Lao Tzu writes, "Hold on to the way of the present, to manage the things of the present, and to know the ancient beginning. This is called the beginning of the thread of the way. Hold on to the way of the present, to manage the things of the present, and to know the ancient beginning." You can see that in this style of writing, Lao Tzu gives us all the keys that we need, but we must meditate upon the word until we go to the seed of the word, and by our great love cause that seed to open and reveal itself to us. We must work to understand the Tao, but he gives us all we need to understand it. Henricks writes, "One thing to which Lao Tzu would have people return seems to be a simpler way of life, perhaps one lived with fewer possessions. We are told that the Taoist sage values calmness and tranquility and has few desires, or lessens his desires." In chapter 22, Lao Tzu writes, "When you have little, you'll attain much. With much, you will be confused." In chapter 44, Lao Tzu advises, "If your desires are great, you are bound to be extravagant. If you store much away, you are bound to lose a great deal. Therefore, if you know contentment, you will not be disgraced. If you know when to stop, you will suffer no harm, and in this way you can last a very long time." Henricks continues, "Another way we can understand return in Lao Tzu's philosophy is that he thought the Taoist must literally return to the Tao by achieving mystical union with the Tao, experiencing the oneness of all things in the Tao, and that some form of meditation would lead to this goal." In chapter 16, Lao Tzu writes, "If you are one with the Tao to the end of your days, you will suffer no harm." In chapter 56 of Arthur Waley's translation, we read, "Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. Block the passages, shut the doors, let all sharpness be blunted, all tangles untied, all glare tempered, all dust smoothed. This is called the mysterious leveling." The mysterious leveling. Waley's comment on the words mysterious leveling is that it is a leveling in which there is a general perception, not affected, that is, not achieved through particular senses. It is, in other words, a certain knowing, a certain awareness that simply descends. Henricks translates, "This is called the mysterious leveling, as this is called the profound union." To have awareness that does not come by one's senses can only come by mystical union with the Tao.
You're watching Elizabeth Clare Prophet, world-renowned author and founder of Summit University. Summit University is located at the beautiful Royal Teton Ranch in Park County, Montana, just north of Yellowstone National Park. If you'd like more information, call 800-323-5228. That's 800-323-5228.
Chapter 47 of the De Tao Jing says, "No need to leave your door to know the whole world. No need to peer through your windows to know the way of heaven. The farther you go, the less you know. Therefore the sage knows without going, sees without seeing, and completes without doing a thing." On the notion of return, says Henricks, it seems clear that Lao Tzu wants people as adults to return to some things they all possessed more fully as children. Genuineness, sincerity, and spontaneity. The important Taoist term, Wu Wei, literally without action, in one sense stands for spontaneity and genuineness. It does not mean literally to do nothing, but rather to act without acting. To spontaneously say and do what is genuinely felt, rather than putting on a show for others or, quote, acting. Thus, at the start of chapter 38, Lao Tzu notes that the truly virtuous person is the one who does the good thing spontaneously, unaware of and unconcerned with the fact that this is what others approve of as virtue. He says, "The highest virtue is not virtuous. Therefore, it truly has virtue. The lowest virtue never loses sight of its virtue. Therefore, it has no true virtue." Lao Tzu and the Taoist sage, Zhuangzi, both talk as though there were a time in the beginning when everyone lived in accord with the way, and no distinctions were made between right and wrong. They say the Confucian advocacy of certain values, humanity, righteousness, filial piety, loyalty, and propriety, was either the result of or the cause of a decline in the way. "For me," this reads, "this time in the beginning was when there was no good and evil, but only the plus-minus polarity of good within itself, before the fall, before the descent from the etheric octave, before the fall from grace, or the falling of the kundalini on the altar of the spine, before duality, dualism, and relative good and evil." This is a pivotal point in our understanding of the great Tao. We see the plus-minus polarity of the Father, Mother, God as not a polarity of good and evil, but of the plus-minus factors within the all-good, which is the only reality. Some there are who teach that good is in polarity with evil, and for everything that there is good, there must be something bad, a front side and a back side, like something positive and something negative. But this is a worldview of duality, two-eyed vision. Evil can never be in polarity with good, because good is the divine whole and contains within itself the plus and the minus. This pivotal teaching, therefore, is for us a departure from all of the interpretations and worldviews that take off from the Tao and come down into the concrete terms that we will be discussing later. You need to remember this, Because if there is an absolute evil that is in polarity with an absolute good, then there shall never be the elimination of absolute evil. Another corollary that is derived from this is that therefore there is no evil, that you cannot judge anything to be evil because it is simply the other side of good. So it neutralizes the sense that there is something that must be neutralized as light neutralizes darkness. Continuing with Hendricks, he writes, "Life itself is of value in Taoism. To live out one's natural years in peace, contentment, and tranquility is the goal. Health and long life are two of the benefits enjoyed by the Taoist." Lao Tzu asks at the start of chapter 44, "Fame or your body, which is more dear? Your body or possessions, which is worth more?" Does Lao Tzu teach immortality? Hendricks says, later in the Taoist religion, immortality is understood as a physical immortality. As a physical immortality. This delights my soul, as you can see. One normally becomes an immortal through a process of transubstantiation, in which one changes the substance of his or her body from gross, heavy, easily decaying matter into matter that is light, pure, and refined, and capable of lasting a long time, if not forever. I observe that the ascension process begins with a spiritually refined diet. You might think that this is the very last thing to be considered. But we know that those who are on heavy diets of the world and are gross in their bodies have no receptivity to spiritual things, whereas those people who have left off the dense foods of the world and of the lower nature and go to less and less animal foods, less substances that are toxic, these begin to attune with the great Tao and with the infinite. And so it is true that the ascension process, the very first step, begins with withdrawing from the dense foods of the world. Progressively more spiritualized in consciousness, the devotee uses mantra and yoga, the violet flame, devotions to the deity, to attain the immortality of the soul. The scriptures state, and the ascended masters teach, that the soul is not immortal until the soul becomes fused or bonded to the living Christ, the Lord Krishna, the Buddhic mind. And so the soul is that portion of self that is descended into the matter spheres. In order to ascend again, that soul must attain that alchemical union, that marriage. It says in scriptures, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. Sinning in that sense means expending the life force until there is nothing left. And so it is the immortality of the soul that we seek. But we must seek it through the immortality, and I say that in quotes, of the physical body and the four lower bodies. And I will continue to explain this concept. The devotee also uses ablutions of the four lower bodies, bathing them in light and the sacred fire, charging them with the sacred breath, partaking of the body and blood of the Lord or Guru, and assimilating the word until he also should become one with the word, with Brahman, in the beginning, in the point of the origin of the Tao. The point of origin of the Tao is my definition of the beginning. Thus the negative spirals of matter in disintegration are reversed by the devotee who so practices. Light charges every atom and cell of being, and the soul weaves and wears her deathless solar body, and she prepares for ultimate mystical reunion with God in the ritual of the ascension. Although some have ascended physically, most leave behind the physical body and ascend spiritually. Henricks writes, Lao Tzu says nothing straightforwardly and unambiguously about immortality of any kind. Theoretically, we could certainly argue that insofar as the Tao is that one reality that existed before all other things and is an eternally existing reality, and insofar as the Taoist in some way becomes one with the Tao during his or her lifetime, that at death the Taoist realizes this oneness in the fullest possible way and enjoys the immortality of the Tao. This is an argument that would see Taoist mysticism as parallel in a sense to the Indian mysticism of the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. Translator Arthur Waley, for instance, reads the end of chapter 16 as, Tao is forever, and he that possesses it, though his body ceases, is not destroyed. Henrik says, at the end of chapter 33, we find the line, He who dies but does not truly perish enjoys long life. I take that to mean, he who dies but whose soul does not really perish enjoys long life in the eternal Tao. Henricks says, importantly, the Ma Wang Dui texts do not have the verb to perish in the text, but rather the verb to forget. The text would appear to say, therefore, to die but not to be forgotten, that is true long life. I take that to mean, for this mortal to put off mortality and to put on immortality is not to be forgotten in the memory of God. In the memory of God is the recording of the soul that has become immortal, and that is true long life. I say, he who cannot be forgotten is made of immortal stuff. He cannot be forgot, he is real and everywhere present in the Tao. The immortality sought and realized by the Taoist is the same that is or can be realized by any lover of God. It is the mystical union of the soul with the universal Christ and the universal Buddha. It is the soul's assimilation unto God in the individuality of the I am that I am. The soul who fulfills this union steps forth as an immortal and is henceforth known as an ascended master or an ascended lady master. The teachings of Taoism set before us the goal of a long and healthy life, as well as the goal of immortality, and immortality here and now. In order to reach that goal of immortality through the ritual of the ascension, we need to plan on and make preparations for a long, healthy life, just in case we need it. On a practical level, we need time and space to transmute our karma, pass our tests, make 2 million right decisions, and fulfill our divine plan, so we can go home to the octaves of light. The 18th century English author Samuel Johnson once wrote, "To preserve health is a moral and religious duty, for health is the basis of all social virtues. We can no longer be useful when not well. There is no doubt about it. We need to be strong in body, mind, and spirit in order to deal with the daily challenges of worlds in transition. We need to be morally, spiritually, and psychologically healthy so that God can use us to bear His light and to work His works on earth. For we would walk in the footsteps of our Lord, who said, "I must work the works of Him that sent me." Are we not all sent by God, by Jesus Christ, by a certain guru, a certain ascended master, by our own I Am Presence? We are workers in the field of the Lord. Yes, that field that is the Tao. We are workers in that field, and we are sent. And that someone, that manifestation of God that sponsored us, expects a recompense, expects us to return a harvest. I must work the works of Him that sent me. This was the Tao of Jesus. This was His calling, His Dharma. He had no other choice. And when we know the Tao here at the point of the heart, we have no other choice but to work the works of Him that sent me. Jesus said it in another way. He said, "My Father worketh hitherto, and I work." You can see Him in the rhythm of the great Tao, of the yin and the yang. My Father works, and I work. My Father works, and I work. The perpetual yin and the yang, participating in the out-breath, the in-breath of cosmos. It is an impelling force, and we know that the work is the other side of the word. It is the omega of the alpha. And we understand that those who have that sense of the work of the Lord have also internalized the word. And they are engaged with Lord Shiva in the great cosmic dance. And the very rhythm of the cosmos and the heartbeat of the Tao is part of them. Our Lord admonished us, "Work while ye have the light, for the darkness will come when no man can work." Jesus Christ fully embodied the way of the Tao. He attained immortality through the great Tao. He said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father, Mother, God, but by the great causal body of the Tao that I have become." The key to your immortality here and now is the bonding of your soul and your heart and your mind to the Lord. But that's not all. Jesus said, "Except ye eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink His blood, ye have no life in you." Thus, it is to assimilate all that Jesus is, was, and ever shall be, that is the goal of our life, your life, my life, on earth as in heaven. Heaven is neither future nor past. Heaven is here and now. On earth as in heaven, this is our goal. To that end, Jesus takes us to His sacred heart and makes us one with Him. "Beloved, now are we the sons of God," John wrote, "and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when He, the living Christ, shall appear, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is." We shall see Him in the mirror reflection of the image and likeness of the Son of God. And in that mirror reflection, we too shall see ourselves as He beholds us. as immortal sons and daughters of God. Now, here and now, we are immortal sons and daughters of God. And every man that hath this hope in him, John wrote, purifieth himself even as he is pure. The De Dao Jing is a message of eternal well-being, lived in the here and now, through our embracing of the great Tao, the great causal body, and embodying it here below. Embodying the causal body and the I Am Presence, embodying the Holy Christ Self. I say to all of you, resist not this process. Remember, I began by saying there is pain and greater pain when you begin to rearrange the lines of mortality written in the unconscious and the subconscious. We must pursue the embodiment of our true self and not remain comfortable as mortals who use the Tao but refuse to become it. Like we milk cows, we milk the Tao, but we refuse to enter into the Tao. So let us look at the beginnings and the endings of our mortality and see what we can do to transcend ourselves in the here and now. The here and now is all that we have. Truly, it is our only possession, the here and the now, an increment of time and space of eternity. I would like us to seal this teaching in our hearts by singing to the great mother of the Tao itself, our beloved Kuan Yin.
Lotus
more information on the mystical paths of the world's religions, call toll-free 800-323-5228. The preceding program was presented by Summit University, Box A, Livingston, Montana, 59047 1390. If you'd like to know more, call this number or write this address.